Space Arena.
Ground Arena.
SAGA Podcast.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? It is Banana Crapshoot. You are here at Space Arena, Ground Arena, where we cover Star Wars Unlimited from the ground up into space. With me, we got the whole crew tonight. Dan, how you doing?
Pretty good. I'm jazzed, excited, anxious, all the things.
All the things. Mr. Ben, how are you doing tonight? Good. So
Looking forward to
tonight,
getting into it, guys.
it's pre-release week. We got pre-release stuff happening this weekend. So going into a new set from set 1, moving into set 2, talking about how to play test and what are some ways you can play test if you've just been playing with starter decks. What's that process like to start getting ready for competitive events, and what that process of play testing looks like. Do either of you guys have a cardinal rule that you always follow for play testing, regardless of the game? You got an event coming up. What's your process for play testing? Mr. Ben?
I don't know if I would call it a cardinal rule, but I certainly have a process. I think that's probably a more accurate description. Generally, I like to identify what I think is going to be strong in the meta, figure out what amongst that list of strong things I think is going to show up, and then I look at the decks that I want to play that don't get dog walked by those things. I don't necessarily want to beat the meta because I don't want to be pigeonholed into playing particular decks. So I'll pick the leaders that I think look like the most fun for my play style, and then build up each of those decks. And then I think another important part is building a gauntlet, but that's sort of almost a subtopic unto itself. I'll throw it to Dan. What do you got to say?
Yeah, similar process. I usually don't include like my deck or leader selection here as a part of my playtesting. I've kind of settled on what deck I want to run, and maybe I'm swapping out a couple cards. But for me, playtesting is making sure that when I sit down at a tournament and I see the leader that I'm playing against, or the colors if it's a different game or something like that, I know what my game plan is. So it's about getting in enough reps against varied enough or the expected matchups that I'm prepared for what people are going to throw at me. So some of that is figuring out what the popular other deck styles are. Some of that is figuring out which ones it's going to require more mental energy to overcome, right? If there's a hard matchup where like one mistake is going to lose you the whole game, then that's the round you got to really pay attention during. So making sure I've gotten the right reps against the right matchups, and that I know enough to recognize the matchup as early in the match as I can.
When you guys are playtesting, do you generally focus on just your local group? Do you try to get games in on webcam with other people online to see different decks and more decks, or do you focus on mainly your main core group, or do you goldfish as your main way of playtesting? Start with Dan.
A bit of both. I think getting in a webcam league or a webcam group can be really helpful to building a community that you can get those reps with. I think it's important to get games in against players that know the deck you're playing against, right? If I play Mr. Ben's Thrawn deck and have no idea how to play it, it's not going to be very helpful to someone if they're practicing against me, right? So you need to find players or build up a community well enough, or a tight-knit group of players, that you have people of maybe the 3 or 4 different deck archetypes that you think are out there, that's like their main deck or their side deck, one of their top 2. So when our group play test, our local group, right, they look to me to play a Chewbacca deck, they look to me to play a Vader deck, and then someone else is always playing a Chirrut deck, someone else is always playing a Leia deck, someone's playing a Sabine deck. So we kind of have our bases covered just by having varied leader styles among our group. But I think it's really important to find players that are good at the decks you want to play against, and you can do that a lot easier online, right? The fish tank that I live in is much smaller than like the fish tank of the whole world playing this game. So if I can get more games in against better players, that's hopefully going to make me a better player as well. So I think finding people to play against online, finding people to like give you ideas online is really important. And for our group, it's really important for us to know if we're playing right in a tournament, or if we're playing for fun, or if we're playing to play test. It's a different mentality of talking through your moves with your opponent, even sometimes if it's a close group. So for me, it's a mixture of all of them. What about you?
Ben, what about you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the obvious correct answer is all of the above. So I completely co-sign. I basically agree with everything Dan had to say, but a concept that I think might be helpful in this area is the difference between drilling and like doing live like sparring. So when I'm with my local guys,
Hmm.
we'll flop our hands on the table and be like, "Hey, what's the best line here?" And we're kind of discovering the lines. We're playing out. Ooh, actually, hold on. I didn't realize this. This put me in a terrible position. That was clearly a mistake last turn. What if I did this? That's the places where I feel like I'm figuring out the deck. I'm doing the exploring. I'm understanding how these matchups work. When I go to like webcam type play, while a lot of the webcam leagues are not the most prestigious competitive. I mean, there can only be one most prestigious. Uh, there is a level of competition there, and I feel like that's a little more akin to like sparring or like live rolling, where you're playing against an opponent who's really resisting. We're not going to show each other our hands, but on some level, it's still, maybe this is my in-person bias showing, but I feel like a lot of the webcam play is an extension of my play testing, where I don't necessarily know the skill level of the opposing player. I don't necessarily know what their strengths and weaknesses are. Whereas within my local play group, everybody knows I'm the control guy. Everybody knows Joe does it. We have our specialties, and kind of like Dan was saying, with different people having specific leaders. Completely agree. Although I would break it down more by archetype than leader, at least within my group. Uh, I think both having the ability to have somebody you can really tear the lines apart and tip your hand to, and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. Tell me where I'm wrong, and not having ego around that and being able to hear that. That's a really important part of play testing. But so is the, maybe not the 1K stakes where the pressure's on at your showdown, or galactic championship or whatever it's going to be, but taking it just that step higher where you're playing against somebody who you're not sitting in their kitchen. The stakes are just, internet fame or whatever, but it does add a little something extra. But I think that something extra is also an important skill to practice. So it was a very long way of saying I agree with everything Dan said. How about you, Banana?
I also largely just concur with what you guys have said. Um, the point you brought up about kind of playing with open hands and talking through your lines is something I think very beneficial for players newer to play testing and getting ready for competitive events. Because in my mind, like if you just show up to your locals, you might be a little more timid, and then you're trying to get more involved in the community. Not sure how this process looks like. Your local only does 3 rounds of Swiss and you're out of there. So like how to play test for a bigger event. This could be a new concept, playing with open hands, talking through lines, and trying to plug into that community and become an active part of that community, and drive some of those things if that's not happening at your stores. Or if you don't have a group of people to play test with, join us on the SAGA Discord, and you can reach out to one of us. We'll try to get some webcam games with you and get that going for you. Similar thing with the local group. We got the Sabine players, we got the Krennic players, and we got I'm kind of all over the place, but there are definitely specialized focuses, and then go from there. And just one thing that helped me is playing better players than myself. If you can find players better than you, that see the Matrix better than you, playing those people really elevates your game faster than anything else, I think. It's okay to get steamrolled every once in a while, but then you break it down and you look at why you got steamrolled and you learn from that. But yeah, so building on that and the concept of playtesting, some of that has to do with deck building and how you tweak your deck during playtesting. So Ben, say you have your 50 card deck. We're not even in the sideboards yet, and you're playing this deck and you're trying to figure out what worked and wasn't and what doesn't. What are some signs or indicators that, hey, this card should probably not be in my deck? And how do you know which cards to add in place of it? And how many changes is too many at one time? Right? If I get steamrolled, do I change half my deck right away? Or do I just make one or two changes? Do I completely overreact? Do I go slow? What is the process for tweaking my deck during playtesting to try to optimize it?
See, I'm limbering up to answer this because you're throwing so much at me.
Yeah.
And I can handle it all with 2 words. You ready? It depends. So, like most things in card games, context is really, really important. If you're playing a control deck and you're getting run over by aggro and you're not even to the sideboard, how does my control strategy deal with aggro part of playtesting yet? If you're still trying to figure your deck out and you're losing to aggro, that's not necessarily the time to change your deck because you're supposed to lose to aggro and you haven't even put those tools in yet. You're just trying to figure your deck out. So depending on where you're at in playtesting and why you're losing, that's the most important part of like how many changes do you make. Generally, another part of what you asked was how do you know when a card is bad or needs to go, or if I ever have a card that I get in my hand and I'm like, ooh, I'm excited to see this, and then it's still in my hand at the end of the game, that card probably gets cut because I'm wrong to be excited to see it. Cards should not rot in your hand. Cards should be played. Cards should do things. So that now it is of course more complicated than that, but that is one sort of checkbox in my head. If I notice these cards that I think are good are just kind of still in my hand when the game ends, game after game, that's a huge warning sign to me that this card is not as good as I think it is, or it's not effective in the particular matchup that I'm playing. It doesn't necessarily mean automatic cut, but it means that card needs to come under a lot more scrutiny. I have another 2-word phrase that I think is really, really, really helpful in playtesting and not enough people implement, and that is I concede. Know when the game is lost and you're wasting your time. Like at the mats, when it's real, when you're playing for stakes, play it to the bloody end. I totally agree with you. But in testing, scrub that match, re-rack, and get another rep, and that's more important than playing every single game to the bitter end, in my opinion. Dan, do you want to wade into this ocean of questions that answer at us?
Yeah, well, I'll counter one of your points. I think knowing when to concede is important in a timed match anyway, right? In 50-minute best of 3 timed matches against a control mirror, if you're 30 minutes into the game and you haven't conceded yet, you probably need to because you need to move to game 2 and try to start winning. So I think that's part of playtesting too. Isn't just what card do I play and when, but when do I make decisions that move me to the next game, or when do I make decisions that like keep me in this game? How do I figure out that pivotal point? In the same light, right, in this game we're resourcing a card most rounds. So one thing you can do while you're playtesting, right, is at the end of every game, flip over all your cards in your resource row and see what you decided to throw down, because those were cards that you consciously decided, this card isn't important for me this game compared to the other cards in my hand. And if you consistently, game after game, look at your resources and see the same 3 cards in there, like all 3 copies of Forlom, then maybe Forlom is not a good card. Not saying he's not, but I'm just saying, like, when you look at that, I keep I don't have it with me, I should have grabbed it, but I keep like a little notebook, right? So after every game, if I lost, I write why I think I lost, like if there was a decision point, something like that. I don't know why I write it down. For me, it's I write it down because that helps me remember it better, but it's good to have that log. And now we live in the world of cell phones, so you can take a picture of your opening hand and then ask someone later, hey, what should I have done? Or take a picture of all those resources in your resource row after 10 games and realize, oh, Hunter of the Haxian Brood was in my resource row every game, so maybe it's not a good card to include in my deck. So on the question of like how much is too much to change, I agree it depends, right? Typically, once I am settled in on a deck, I try not to change more than 2 cards out. So if I'm running copies of 3, that would mean changing 6 cards. That's a little bit over 10% of your deck. might be a little bit too much for some people. Some people like to try to change only 1 or 2 cards, but I would think about swapping no more than 2 cards out just to see how much that impact has on your game. I do think that one of the most important things you can do in playtesting is make sure that you're not just getting repetitions in, you're not just getting drills or spars in, but you're reflecting on each game and learning from the losses, but learning from the wins as well, right? If you steamrolled someone, was that because they made a play mistake or did you make a good play? Knowing what those good plays are and pulling more of those up is really important. Knowing what the bad plays are and avoiding those can be really important. Nothing hurts more than like when you play test a bunch and lose a bunch of times in a certain matchup because of a mistake, and then you get to your real tournament and make the same mistake. It's a major bummer. So I think gathering information, whether that's storing it in your head, writing it down, having a conversation, however you get that information and making sure that you learn from it is an important part of playtesting. Because otherwise you can play 1,000 games like me and still be bad. So you need to learn from mistakes. And this is true like in all professions, right? You learn from mistakes while teaching and then teach better the next time. You do the same thing in card games, right? We learn how to ride our bikes by falling down and skidding our knees, not by just jumping on the bike and being, an awesome BMX biker right away. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to lose, especially in playtesting. But make sure you learn from them. Make sure you don't just get frustrated and say, "Oh, well, that matchup was a loss." That matchup was a loss, but was there a decision you made that could have made it a closer game? Because making that a closer game and then your opponent makes a mistake, all of a sudden that was a game you should have lost that you won, and then that swings your whole tournament. I don't know if I answered your question. I tried.
You did. That was good. You brought up a really good point I want to talk about. I was taking notes. That was for effect. So, note taking, following what you did, remembering what you did, so you can reflect and learn. That's a big one. I'm glad you brought that up, and you hit it way better than I could. So I'm just gonna say I agree. Thanks for bringing it up. What about how do you play test?
So I do want to say there's this sort of like toxic player image of you play a game with somebody and then after the game they go, "Oh, well, I would have won if X card would have come down differently." And like there is a way to be like inconsiderate in how you do like a post-mortem of a game, but just don't do it that way. Just be friendly in how you approach this. I think most of the time your opponents will engage and say, "Oh yeah, you had me scared when you played this card. I think this was a pivotal moment." And if you're not kind of treating it like you're a salty, upset person who's like making excuses for the loss and instead saying like, "Hey, what happened here?" Even at like high stakes events, most of the time people will kind of help you do a post-mortem on your game. And if you're a new player or even if you're an experienced player who just wants to get better, that's one of the best ways you can learn. Particularly somebody who just beat you. Like, "Hey man, I thought this was a good move, yet you stuffed it here. Like, what's going on? Like, what was the composition of your hand?" Now, sometimes people, everybody has wants to play the deck list a little close to the vest sometimes. So, there are boundaries. But most of the time, I've found that people are pretty open to breaking down matches after the fact. If you're just like polite about it, which shouldn't be that hard. Sorry, Banana, you started to say something else though.
No, that's cool. I was gonna say now that but yeah, that's also a good point. Talk to your opponent afterwards. That's helpful too. Bringing sideboards into playtesting. How do you playtest with the sideboard? How do you know how to build a sideboard when you're playtesting? What's that process look like for you guys? So we'll start with Ben this time.
Generally, during the "what does my deck do" part of playtesting, I am able to figure out where the weaknesses are, and depending upon how rampant I think those weaknesses are going to be in the meta, that kind of, it's like, what tools do I think I'm going to need that aren't part of my plan A? A lot of times for me, that means what cards can I sacrifice when I know I'm not playing a control mirror to shore up my match against aggro. That's typically where I'm at because I like thinky, control-y decks. Sometimes there's a specific matchup or even a specific card that's in the meta, like a great example is the way Confiscate has started to come in sideboards because of the existence of largely entrenched and maybe to a lesser degree traitorous. Again, these are things you're probably going to discover through the normal course of playtesting, and when it comes time to make a sideboard, generally I have a pretty good idea of what cards I want in there. The harder part for me is figuring out what pieces I can knock out of my plan A version of the deck to make room for those extra answers.
What about you, Dan?
To me, how I do sideboarding is a little weird. Maybe it's not how normal people do it, but it's what I do, me and my buddies. So what we do is we actually make 60 card decks, right? our decks are 60 cards, and then we figure out before a tournament what 10 cards am I going to put in my sideboard. And for me, that call is based on what I think is going to show up at the meta. If it was a really aggro-heavy week the week before and it's locals, I expect a lot of people to pivot to control. So maybe I move some of my, I expect a lot of people to pivot to mid-range. So maybe I bring in some of my control pieces and move out some of my aggro pieces, right? So to me, I try to make like a deck that's a little bit oversized. I don't run a 50 card deck into a game. I might into a playtest game, right? Run a 52 card deck and figure out what card was always useless and remove it. But I'll sort of make an overstuffed deck and then figure out what pieces can I remove to still make this work out. So to me, the deck isn't a 50 card deck. It's a 60 card deck. It's 50 plus 10, and then figuring out what 10 to remove is important. And part of that is matchup dependent, but you can't remove them before the match. You have to like have a deck list solid for the whole tournament. So that part is meta reading, right? Which 10 cards do I pull out of my deck so that they're in there? So that's how I do sideboarding. It's a little weird having overly stuffed decks when we talk about them as a group, but it works out for our group pretty well.
And how does that is interesting. So you start with 60 and then you whittle it down before an event. So you get most of that, what to put in your sideboard done during your normal playtesting, and then it's just adapting it.
Yeah,
based off
right.
meta
Then
calls.
I know all my tools really well, and I try to make that decision before I drive to the event, because if I'm making it in the heat of the moment, it's usually pretty rough. But we have like a group chat, right, and we're talking about it the day before the event, and then we kind of all make our final cuts and see what the other people in the group think. I think I'm going to cut this because I expect a lot of blah. And that's the advantage of having like a team or a group that you play with, right? You have this person to bounce ideas off of, so you figure out what to cut or what to add.
Yeah. Mine are usually whatever deck I'm playing, right? You should obviously know from playtesting what you're weak against, what you're strong against, what your lines are, your outs for those decks, and my sideboard becomes an answer to those problems. The problems I have against deck A, I know I can add these cards to it to make that matchup better, and then what cards in my deck am I willing to sacrifice and move out to make that happen. A lot of that for me, I guess, just comes from playtesting with the main 50 cards most of the time, and then some like most of the time we'll just do like quick best of ones over. It's not always best of 3, but then if I know if I'm looking for this matchup, somebody will play that deck, and then I'll sideboard how I would sideboard for that matchup. So if I'm playing, Mr. Ben's theoretical control monster into an aggro deck, I'll sideboard before the game for that, specifically for that matchup, and see how that set of 50 performs, if that makes sense.
Sounds like a misplay. Seems like the correct line would be to say, I concede.
Yeah. Also regarding Dan's comment about Forlom,
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
It's just the
Not
card that was
cool.
pulled up on my screen, so I could
Sure.
name a character.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else you want to share with the group about playtesting? Things you do to playtest, rules of thumb, things not to do. How about that? What are some things not to do when playtesting?
Don't change too much. I mean, you made that joke earlier, right? And said, how do you know when you've changed too much that you've overreacted? Don't overreact during playtesting. Realize that you're trying to gather information. You're not trying to win every game while you're playtesting. You're trying to figure out what the ins and outs are. So if you overreact every time you playtest, like I know a person that used to play Lorcana in an online client that no longer exists. And every time they would lose, they would swap like 20 cards out of their 50-card deck. That's too much. You're basically running a different deck every time, and you're not getting repetitions to learn how your deck functions. So don't change too much. I think if you change too much, that doesn't work out.
Ben?
Don't be precious. Like, it doesn't matter if the art on that card is really cool. Well, I guess
Oh, it
let me
matters.
answer this from the assumption that what you're trying to do is win games. Okay, so we're setting aside all other concerns for the answer to this question. What we want to do is win. I think you need to be able to take Darth Vader out of your deck, even if you paid $80 a card for that playset. If that card's not working in your deck, you can't be precious about it. You got to be able to listen to feedback from your teammates, from your notes, and go, man, this card is just not performing for me. It's a great card, might not be great in this deck. So be willing to cut anything in your deck if the right argument is presented or if the right data set is presented, and like don't be stubborn in the face of that data. Like listen to your teammates, listen to your notes, because that's going to be better than your gut instinct some of the time. I mean, there has to be a mix of both. You do need to trust your instincts some percentage of the time when you're playing the game for stakes, but in testing, I think you need to take your emotions out of it as much as possible and trust the data. So don't be precious.
I like it. So what I'd like to do now, as we are getting to the end of our playtesting discussion, is come up with, we didn't talk about this beforehand, but we're going to do it anyway, like 3 Space Arena, Ground Arena core tenets of playtesting. So 3 things that you can live by and die by when it comes to playtesting. Does anybody have the first one they'd like to recommend?
Reps. Just the word
No.
reps. I think
Crickets.
that's the single most important thing.
Again,
Even bad practice is better than no practice,
get
but
reps.
obviously perfect practice is better than bad practice. But all that comes down to reps. That's all. The more reps, the better.
I think
I'm good with that one, Dan. You good
one
with that
is
one?
knowing what phase of playtesting you're in. Ben alluded to this earlier, but there's this experimental phase early on where you're willing to tinker with your deck with like not very little reasoning, but with suggestions and be experimental. And then there's the, like we just said, reps portion, the really get to know your deck and don't change it as much as you might have been willing to in the earlier phase. I think that there's a transition point you have to sort of figure out in the middle of playtesting, and if you pick way too late to stop changing your deck, it can really mess you up, and if you pick way too early to stop changing your deck, you can get locked into the wrong spot. So deciding sort of before you start playing games, am I still in the experimental phase where I have 20 cards sitting to the side and I'm swapping them in and out every game, or am I in the point where this is the deck I think I'm bringing and now I need to get practice with it? That was a long one. It wasn't one word like Ben's.
It's all right. We get it. One, I don't know if it's good enough, but one I would recommend is be involved. Be involved in your community. Don't just go to your best of 1 3-round of Swiss local, play 3 games and leave. Right? Like that's not playtesting. You need to be involved and be active in that community, and I guess maybe that just goes back to reps, so that's probably not a good one.
Well, if you don't have a community
So
and you want to get better, one of the ways you can do that, and I know this is hard, I get that the kind of people who play these games, this is probably the hardest thing ever, but just talk to the other people at your locals who are playing and say, hey, I'm struggling here. Like, what do you guys think? Yes, you might run into somebody who's like condescending, or it could happen, but it probably won't. And if you ask enough people, you're going to hit somebody who's going to be willing to help you. And if you guys hit it off, well, now you have a testing partner. Now you have somebody to get into a Discord conversation with, and that becomes like a gift that keeps on giving. But I get it. That first conversation can be awkward. We're all probably a little socially awkward because we play TCGs, you know, like maybe I'm projecting a little. I don't know, guys.
So what's a good way to bring that down into a short, concise rule to go by?
Have a group or find a group or make a group. Something, right?
Be part of a group.
Yeah.
Find a team. Find a team.
All right, I like that.
Even if it's an online team, I think in in-person teams, there are things you get in person that you can't get over webcam. But if the only option that's available to you is an online team and webcam games and Discord chats, again, some practice is way better than no practice. So if you want to improve, if that's your goal is to be competitive at this game, you got to commit to sucking for a while, and you probably need to find some teammates to help you train.
Commit to sucking. That's one I would like to recommend. That's a great one. You got to be willing to get kicked in the teeth over and over and over again. So that way you can get a Mace Windu promo.
You can't be
That's
good at
what it
anything
comes
without
down to.
sucking at it for a while. For most of us. I'm sure there's some people out there who are just annoyingly gifted at everything they do. That's not me.
It's not me. I still remember the first competitive card game tournament I went to, and I got completely waxed, and that just motivated me to not suck that bad ever again. But I wasn't plugged into a community. I didn't have good playtesting habits. Um, so that was all on me. And once I started doing those things, once I started playing against people better than me, and I started being plugged into a community, and I started asking questions, doing all the things we talked about today, I started seeing rapid improvement. But really, it's getting kicked in the teeth by better players than me is what I think made me a better player overall.
So is it fair to sum up our three as get in your reps, find a team, and have awareness of where you're at in the playtesting process?
Yep.
Concise.
Does that seem like three good commandments? Did we land on a consensus here?
Yeah. Know your reps, or be part of a group, get your reps, and know where you are in your playtesting process. I like it. So those we're gonna get plaques made. Um, they're gonna go on the back of a beanies for Mr. Ben and T-shirts for the rest of us.
If we can get it to fit, man.
I'm pretty sure he's gonna get a. We can get it to fit on your jujitsu shorts. How about that? The next
Deal. I'll definitely rep the golden rules of the SAGA cast in my next jiu-jitsu match.
I don't know if Spread Shop does rolling shorts, but we'll see.
I actually have custom rolling shorts that I got with Invincible on one side and Conquest on the other, and then like where the belt buckle would be, I have the panel from the comics where they're punching each other and their hands are exploding. So like it kind of tells this like one of my favorite stories out of the Invincible comics. This is incredibly dorky. I'm sorry.
It's fine. We're okay. I'm in the process personally of going through my comic book collection because my kids aren't really into it, and they just like I've got a bunch of long boxes in my closet that have literally been there for 5 years, never touched. So I'm in the process of going through it. I have a huge stack like this big.
Nice.
Can't see, very big, of that's probably like 60 comics deep of stuff I'm gonna send out to get graded because there's a bunch of first appearances of characters. Like I have a first appearance of Eddie Brock and the first appearance of like the Dazzler and
Oh, nice.
Nimrod, and like I have a bunch of first appearances. So bunch of old X-Men, that a bunch first appearance of Gambit, Jubilee, all that good stuff. So I'm gonna send a bunch of that stuff out to get graded and just sell it because. So I get it. Some stuff I'm keeping, some stuff that I have some sort of attachment to, but the stuff that I don't have an attachment to, it's gone. All right. So we talked about how to play test. Let's make some bold predictions for set 2. So does everybody want to do 2? I think Dan recommended 2 bold predictions.
I did without having any ready myself, so I'm frantically
I don't have any
scrolling
ready.
through cards right here.
I'm gonna figure it out. So Mr. Ben, he's prepared. I know that
I am prepared. We can tell which one of us was a Boy Scout. I'm sorry, just a Scout. They call them Scouts now.
So
okay. So one of these predictions I have already made on the show, and I'm sticking to my guns on this. The Pike Sentinel sucks. This is not going to be a good control tool. I'll acknowledge there might be some deck somewhere where it makes sense for some reason, but it's going to be fringe play at best. This is not a tool that control decks want. This is not a tool that mid-range decks want. This is not a tool that anybody wants. This card is garbage. I stand by that prediction. My second one is that I think people are going to start to get real grumpy about direct damage to the base from hand. We already had like Ruthless Raiders, the For a Cause I Believe In, sort of K2SO, but we're getting like the Daring Raid, the Reckless Gunslinger kind of MIGs. We're getting a lot more like direct base damage that you can just, I could have a naked board and just start hitting your base from hand. I think people are going to complain about that on the internet. They're going to be salty. Those are my 2 predictions.
Those are pretty good. I would say, with my experience in Lorcana recently and gaming lore directly from hand, uninteractably, it's become pretty brutal when enough of it gets out there, and it's sort of the equivalent here. Sorry, you were going banana.
Well, I'm writing down
Oh, okay, so we can see how
The
wrong we are later. Good,
bold,
good.
yeah, yeah. On my notepad that I had to rip up my playtesting sheet for dramatic effect, you know. So next sheet is. I just changed like 65 cards, so I'm good. It's an anti-mill deck that has 75 cards in it, so.
You have to iron that out later to keep your playtesting notes. Oh, I actually need that data.
All right, my first bold prediction is that I think Moff Gideon by the end of this set is going to be a staple leader.
I
I
love
think
it.
he's slept on right now, but his Imperial tag works with almost everything people have from set 1. Overwhelm on a leader is incredibly strong, and Overwhelm on characters that cost 3 or less is really strong in decks with Vader and things like that. So I think that he's got the right stats to be an awesome leader in a bunch of aspects. Maybe not Boba awesome from set 1, but I think he'll be pretty staple in the meta where he sees different types of play between different styles of deck. So I think right now he's kind of slept on compared to some of the other newer leaders. Maybe it's because we saw stuff about him earlier, but I think he's going to be great. My other predictions weren't very bold, so I have to figure one out. I think, I guess, bold prediction number 2. I think the Underworld trait synergy is currently slept on as well. People don't seem as high on Underworld as they were on Rebels and Imperials and units in set 1, but I think that FFG did a really good job putting in enough of a new keyword to make it not feel half complete, which happens a lot in new games, right? They'll introduce a new mechanic or a new tribal synergy and there won't quite be enough of it. Wookiees might be that in this set, but I think that Underworld got enough to really make a splash. Not sure about Mandos, not sure about Wookiees, but I think Underworld's the keyword for this set. Or trait, not keyword.
Alright. So I have Dan says Pike Sentinel sucks. Binder fodder is what I got from Mr. Ben. And direct damage to base is going to make people salty on the internet. And then for Dan, I have Moff Gideon is going to be a staple leader by the end of the set 2 meta. And that Underworld trait is currently slept on.
I think Underworld trait's the best of the new traits, and currently people are all about Mandos and excited about Wookiees. We'll summarize it that way.
Got it.
What do you
So
got for us,
my
Josh?
first What's that?
What do you got? What are your predictions?
My first bold prediction is that Rey will end up being the best leader of the set 2 leaders. I'm not going to give any explanation. I'm not going to give any supporting data or evidence. I'm just making the bold prediction.
That is bold.
And we're going to move on. I think Restore 3 on a leader is absurd. I think
Couldn't help it.
We baited him.
I think the Restore 3 on a leader is absurd. I think her ability to make units that shouldn't be an issue is really strong. When you can make Grogu a 0-5 turn into a 3-8, that's a problem. I mean, you got to use her ability 3 times, but it's there. And she's not locked to a trait like Tarkin is. There are always going to be 1 and 2 drop units with 1 or 2 health. There's always going to be the grit units with low attack power and high health, like the Tree Tender and the Wookiee Warrior, that are really good in her deck already. You have stuff like the Sindari Peacekeeper that's like a 1-5 with Raid 2 that she can buff twice, so now it's a 3-7 with Raid 2 and it's hitting for 5 and restoring 2. Like, that's completely absurd. She creates a lot of math problems your opponent's going to have a hard time figuring out that they normally wouldn't have to. So, yeah. First bold prediction, Rey will be the best leader of the set 2 leaders. My second bold prediction for set 2, I got to think for a second here. I had a really good one. I think his Pike Sentinel is going to be really, really good. Not really. That's not it. I think. Okay, I got this one. Young Han Solo, right? Junk garbage will not leave the binder after like the first 2 events when he gets completely destroyed by Cad Bane decks everywhere. No, that's not a good one either. That's gonna happen anyway. That's not that bold of a prediction. I don't know. This one's hard. How about this? Crate Dragon will be the most expensive legendary from set 2. The Crate Dragon.
That's a good measurable one. My manager would say it's a very measurable goal. Good job. A+ on your performance evaluation.
I got there
More
eventually.
direct damage on that card too.
I got there eventually.
I like it.
That thing's pretty ridiculous. That's a hard thing to deal with. I was
Sure
playing
is.
the other day, and I fought through 2 of them. What was it? It was two crates and something else ridiculous that I fought through, and you think after that it's like, all right, they got nothing else, and then it's like the next thing comes, and I was just like, all right, I'm done. I'm at the point where I'm just conceding because we're not getting anywhere with this. All right.
Sounds like a control deck to me.
It was something. To summarize bold predictions, Pike Sentinel sucks. Direct damage is going to make people cry on the internet. Moff Gideon's a staple leader. The Underworld trait is the best new trait, and people aren't playing it enough right now. Ray's the best set 2 leader, and the Crate Dragon will be the most expensive set 2 legendary. Little market watch action for you. So, one thing I want to talk about quick.
Half of those.
What's that?
I agree with half of those.
Okay.
We got him on 1.
Yeah. The as set 2 kicks off, so too does season 2 of the Space Arena Ground Arena Webcam League, which signups are currently open for. They will be open through July 12th, and then pairings will go out July 15th and July 16th. Round 1 starts. How this works: 8 rounds of Swiss, where each round is a week. You have a week to play your match, your 3 games against your opponent. Play over webcam, report winner and loser, and then we move on. You have Tuesday through Sunday to play your match, and then Monday is when pairings. Normally, I put them in and then post the new ones. So, if you're looking for another way to play, webcam play is a lot of fun. If you're looking to get tied into community, and you want to get some more play testing in, think about hopping on the SAGA Webcam League. You guys got anything about the Webcam League you want to touch on? No.
I'm signing up.
You should.
It's going to be awesome.
play.
Yeah.
Reps.
I have actually already signed up.
Ooh.
There you go.
Again, prepared.
He knows what phase of testing he's in.
Now I'm signed up. Ha.
There you go.
It's pre-release
Yeah, I
week.
mean, all jokes aside, there are a bunch of different options as far as webcam stuff and ways to engage with the game from the comfort of your own home. You know, maybe or maybe not wearing pants, and
You never know.
I think whatever. Yeah, exactly, and you shouldn't know. That's the whole. Whatever one of those leagues feels most like home to you. That's the one you should play in. I think we have a great thing going here. I encourage people to play in this one, but if there's a different format or a different rule set or whatever that works for you, that's cool too. I just want people to play.
Mm-hmm. It's pre-release week. Okay, so some people already have cards. Bunch of boxes went out to some content creators. And there's people opening packs on Whatnot. There's stores selling their stuff early. Like, it's crazy out there. How many pre-releases are you guys hitting? Ben?
I'm gonna do two. Friday night, Saturday morning. My kid is gonna skip jujitsu practice, so we can hit the Saturday morning one. Um, Very much looking forward to it. Last time around, it was a lot of fun, but it was maybe a little stressful. The number of people who really needed to be brought up to speed on the rules, like me, and there was a couple other guys who were trying to help the store out with like teaching people, and that it was a lot. And I think it's going to be a lot easier this time, and I think I'm going to have a lot more fun because that rules pressure is going to be quite a bit lower because the everybody knows set one now. Also, just you mentioned people are like opening packs online and all that. I'll just encourage everyone, if you see somebody else opening a product that you want and they got it before you, that like jealousy feeling, that like anger that you have over this, just let it go, man. It's cool.
Yeah.
Like, we may not all get the packs that we want, like that's part of TCGs, and that does suck. Like, your frustration at that is totally valid, but like, you don't need to take it to the internet and like yell at people. Like, this is a thing that comes with this being our hobby. Like, I would encourage people not to put that vitriol into the public spaces where we're trying to engage with the game, in my opinion.
Dan, how many pre-releases?
Dan, how many pre-releases are you hitting?
There's pre-releases Friday, Saturday, and Sunday here. 3 of them are Saturday night, and then there's a Saturday at noon, and there's a Sunday night and a Friday night. Right now I'm signed up for Sunday night only. We might dabble in Saturday as well. We haven't decided. So it's holiday weekend. It's kind of a hard time because family travel and stuff like that. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
I know I'll be at one Sunday night, and I have 2 tickets, so I have to convince one of my interns to go with me so that they can give me a second box. We'll see. Make them play rock, paper, scissors tomorrow or something. See who loses.
Good idea.
So at least 1, maybe 2.
Cool. There'll be 2 for me, Saturday and Sunday. So looking forward to set 2. Right, set 1 was good. Set 1 was a lot of fun. Really great design and varied meta, but I'm ready for that injection of new cards and new decks and all the new stuff that comes with, 262 new toys. So, well, 252 new toys because there's 10 reprints, but
However many it is.
yeah, I think it's 10. So, there you go. Yeah. Anything else you guys want to hit before we close it out tonight? Any last parting words or any shots you want to fire at anybody? Anybody you got somebody grinding your gears you want to let it loose?
No, probably not today.
Why are you trying
Save
to
that
start
for a different
fights,
show.
dude?
So I was actually talking to my playtest group today, and I said, if I look at my phone, I can tell you. We're on Facebook Messenger, and I said, sorry, this is great radio. I'm almost to the point where I don't care about being diplomatic anymore. And I said I'm at like Attack of the Clones Anakin. I'm about to get to Revenge of the Sith Anakin, and I sent a GIF of Anakin saying like, "I see through the lies of the Jedi." And I said I probably wouldn't get much support from my co-hosts if I made a heel turn though. So
You never know.
Well, who do
Until you
wanna-
try.
Yeah, like you're trying to put this on us. Who do you want to pick a fight with?
it's everybody. This is just one of those days, man. Right? I feel like Cad.
All right, man.
I'm gonna Cad Bane and just shoot shots
Got
everywhere.
your back,
but-
Rob.
No,
Let's do it.
It was it was one of those days. That's all I can say.
We've all had them. It's okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, for nothing else, I hope everyone enjoys their Shadows of the Galaxy pre-release weekend and enjoy set 2, and we'll see you in the arenas.